would be an interesting
live
exercise.
Streaming is on.
And we thought it would be an interesting exercise to cover the M&A outlook. So without wishing to delay any further, I would like to introduce a panel of distinguished experts, and I'll get them to introduce themselves. So perhaps, Kjetil, I will start with you, if you could introduce yourself and your firm.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me and let me sit here on the panel. So my name is Kjetil Haga. I'm a former co-founder and partner of something called Bluefront Capital, which is a private equity firm into the seafood industry. Currently, or 1 year ago, I launched my new firm together with my former colleague Simon, which is called Bluefront Equity, which is a specialized private equity player into the seafood sector. So yeah, based in Oslo, Norway.
Great, thanks very much. And Ignacio, if you could introduce yourself, please. Ignacio, I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Ignacio Kleiman, founding member and managing partner of Antarctica Advisors. We are a firm specialized in the seafood industry with a focus on M&A transactions, based in the U.S. Covering Europe, Latin America, and other areas of the world as well. Thank you for having us.
Okay, great. And, Jørgen, if I could introduce you next, please.
Yeah, so it's Jørgen, part of the Alpha Corporate Finance, the global seafood team out of Bergen, Norway. I have a lot of experience from the industry, and I'm very happy to participate on this panel.
Great, thanks very much. And Magnús, finally, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, and great to be with you all today. My name is Magnús Bjarnason. My company, Mar Advisors, is a specialist seafood M&A boutique. I have worked in the industry both as an advisor and as a manager for the last 20 years.
Thanks. And I'm just going to briefly say again, because we might have had some, we might have mistimed the beginning of our webinar, that I'm Matt Craze. I am the founder of Spheric Research, and I also write reports that are published exclusively by Undercurrent News, and I write for Undercurrent News. And I would also like to point out that in our salmon M&A webinar today, we are sponsored by Mar Advisors, which is an advisory firm that specialized on M&A transactions and in the seafood sector. I would just like to point out that Magnús is part of the panel today, but he's had no more input than any other of the other panelists in the content. So what I'll do, I'll just give everybody a sense of the structure of this webinar. I will talk, we're going to do a presentation which lasts for about 10 minutes. And then we'll get into, I'll do a round of questions, and then we will take questions from the outside audience. So I'm now going to share my screen. And so I won't take more than 10 minutes doing this, just to really introduce the topic of what we can expect in what could be a tough year. Everybody knows that we've had poor prices last year, but the price outlook has recovered quite well. And here's a look at the undercurrent prices that we have on the portal. And one of the things that always sticks out in my mind is how the 2015 pricing was actually higher than 2020 pricing for the last half of last year. The Q4 earnings have just come in, and Moe said that the net effect of the market of the loss of food service is 5% under versus pre-pandemic levels, which tells of the remarkable recovery in the retail sector. And I guess the things to look out for this year, there's a very slow vaccination progress in Europe, in the EU. and much faster recovery in the US. And one of the recent National Fisheries Institute conference was quite interesting in the food service panel experts predicting a euphoric kind of sentiment in consumers. And also a lot of consumers are cash rich in this particular period in time. This is a headline that was recently on The Economist and predicting how people can get consumers active again. We took a look at going back and we used the perspective of Mowi Handbook data to look at deal flow over time. And it's very interesting to see that there's been a long-term decrease in salmon M&A deals, which is probably explained by the fact that there were lots of very small firms that consolidated in the previous decade or so. There was a steady decline of deals in the last 5 years, but perhaps as a consequence of firms getting bigger and fewer firms around in the industry. But then we had this breakout year in 2019. AgroSuper consolidated Aqua Chile to become the world's second largest farmer. And we saw a Chinese firm come in to buy Australis Seafoods and Bakkafrost in the same year. So some really big deals. For sure, the number that we have, 16 deals, is slightly inflated by salmon companies using very high profits over the last couple of years to buy assets in other areas. We saw Cook very active in buying feed mill in Scotland and shrimp farms in Central America. So at the end of 2020, we see that there are some assets that are up for sale. And what we've seen is that they tend to be non-Norwegian. Now, not all of these examples are non-Norwegian assets that are up for sale, but we see that Greek has put his Scottish assets up for sale to make cash available for its Newfoundland expansion. We've seen Huon Aquaculture that is interested in seeking bids from a strategic investor. This could be one of the. We see a number of plays of generational change, where the original founding group of entrepreneurs who started this business 30 or 40 years ago are looking to sell at the right price. Nob Austral, by default, is owned by a private equity firm. It's kind of always up for sale, but we know that Bain Capital, its very wealthy private equity owner, is willing to wait for better prices. And Iceland is hot and is expected to grow. And Magnús I'm sure, will give more details of what's going on in that particular area. This is another exercise we did, and let me explain this. This group of dots. Each dot is a quarter, and EBIT per kilo. And it really, for my mind, it tells the remarkable story of Norwegian profitability over a very long period of time, where even in other parts of the world, we've seen Chile suffer losses, but Norway has kept remarkably profitable over a very prolonged period. Bakkafrost in the Faroe Islands, now with a consolidated industry, has reached that level, perhaps, of consistency. And when you break this down into, we look at the Mowi divisions, I think it really, again, underscores this kind of this stability in the Norwegian salmon industry, where they haven't recorded any losses in certainly the period of time that we looked at. And that's not the case with its other divisions. And so that's really what I wanted to say. So perhaps this trend would suggest that the Norwegian companies are not necessarily looking to sell as much as the other firms. And just to really sort of put this in of a report that we are just about to publish, we see that there's we put together a ranking of the top 50 salmon companies in the world. We see a big a big kind of group of Norwegians at the top of our ranking, but then there's a lot of Chileans in the top 20 to 30 companies. And then lower down, there's a huge kind of group of Norwegian mid-tier farmers. And again, perhaps, and again, I'd be interested to explore this a little bit with the panelists and what they think. But a lot of these Norwegian companies have not really had a loss-making period, and they've survived some of the worst conditions offered by the pandemic. So perhaps they would be less inclined to sell. Who knows? Anyway, that's my presentation, and I'm going to bring us back to panel discussion. And right, let's just get these icons up. So perhaps just to continue with what we were talking about, Jørgen, I'll start with you. The Norwegian salmon industry, where do you think we're at right now in terms of consolidation and what could potentially happen in 2021 in this current market?
I think from a Norwegian perspective that we have an excellent industry that has areas to produce in that is under close surveillance through those production areas that Norway is divided into, the 13 production areas. And when we are talking about sustainability and how the Norwegian aquaculture industry will develop, it's all about really, doing the right things to make sure that you get rid of the sea lice issue, and that you are producing smart and also looking at the opportunities downstream. I think for Norwegian salmon farmers, they have shown a huge portion of resilience over time, and they are very well knit into the fabric of where they are placed, and they are not, call it greedy, in the sense that there is no place to be greedy in these smallish areas. So they are all about this fabric of building close-knit communities and evolving their business model. So where I think that they will go is downstream. And I think hopefully they will acknowledge more how important it is to understand their customers' movements. And for the major part, the Norwegian salmon is going to Europe, and what we see of downstream activities there is that the really good companies in the downstream segments, they understand the movements in the customer base very early on when we are into a pandemic like we have had just now, and still are in, obviously. And I think these valuable traits to understand your customers and really make differences to the products is going to be more important going forward. So I see an investment going into the downstream segments. In addition to that, Matt, I want to make sure that, what we see from Norway is obviously a way of looking at how these big actors like the movies and the SalMar and the Griegs will trade when it comes to further expansion other places than Norway, and that's maybe part of the discussion going forward here.
Right. Because as we've seen, it's difficult for these companies in Norway to operate. They haven't been as profitable outside of Norway as they have in it. Right. When you look at Grieg, you see it's the only one of that group that's really had quarters.
Good. What's going on now?
Are you guys hearing me?
I hear you, but I don't hear Matt.
Neither.
Yeah, no, I think we lost him. Maybe there's another moderator that wants to step in.
Hi, this is Jan from Undercurrent. I wonder if you can maybe continue so far discussing the topics that Matt has pre-arranged with you that you would be covering anyway until he joins again.
Actually, I'm going to take advantage of this moment, and I agree, I think, with your point. The Norwegian companies, I mean, obviously the larger ones are very well established by now, and they are cash rich. I think that if you look at what happened during COVID, they clearly there's a weakness there in their business model, which is they do not really control the route to market or what happens at the point of sale with their product. And that's why they had, to a certain degree, the collapse in prices that they faced. They couldn't really channel all that volume to the market because they depend on other people getting providing them that downstream access. I wonder how they are going to adjust to that. Them being a single trick pony, right? I mean, they have a single species and setting up, channels to market for a single species company. It's absolutely inefficient, right? So, but I do agree with you. I do definitely agree with you that that is their weakness. I mean, they need to get closer to the market and stop being just seafood raw material producers to be something else.
I think, Ignacio, just to take that one step further also, in other protein segments, this has been the king, really understanding your customer base and, going deep into their, product innovation needs and things like that. I think from the outset, the Norwegian aquaculture industry have this opportunity to get stuck in. And some have. I mean, the Leroy and the movie is really, really deep into it. But on a broader scale, and what we see now during the pandemic, we have had prices between 40 and 60 kronos a kilo. And as a consequence, every Friday, there is kind of a tipping contest on how it's going to go. And subsequently, the momentum on the next few months, how that will develop. So I want to take out some of that risk had I been them.
Yeah, I mean, they continue to be a pure commodity player. That's why you see the swings. When you move, the more you move away from the commodity pricing, the more stable your earnings are. So sure. Yes, they are making a lot of money, but what is that quality of earnings there, right? I mean, from an investor's point of view. Yeah, sorry, go back. We were having a good chat here.
Yes, I should probably leave you to it. I think it's yeah. That's Kjetil. I wanted to bring you into the conversation. Also your perspective, and I just wanted to again you come with this background as well of having been very active in the land-based movement as well, and how you think this plays into what could happen this year.
Yeah. I just want to comment your original question a little bit first, because I agree about what's said. And one of the things that I see is when it comes to smaller players, like if we take out the top 50 and we go a little bit lower to all these like small family-owned companies, I see that there are various margins across regions, of course, and they're very vulnerable. A lot of the smaller companies are located in low margin regions. And if you take into consideration the fact that they're not integrated, I think a lot of them have seen the pandemic as kind of an eye-opener on how actually vulnerable they are when it comes to the market conditions which we are in. And has actually pushed a few of the smaller players into consider, like, is there a future for us as a very, very small salmon farmer? And if you add on top of that, a kind of a generation shift where the younger generation coming in thinking about taking over, and they see like, okay, what is actually the route going forward? We should maybe spend a lot of money building a brand or integrate ourselves, but we are actually too small to do that. What is our options going forward? So I've seen some movements when it comes to smaller salmon farmers considering and generation shift, kind of a cocktail of kind of kind of bring some transactions to the table here. So that's very interesting to see how that moves going forward.
I think there's what we see is that there is a lot of working together already, right? In some regions, they're really good at it. And I think the next step from there would really be a more wider consolidation on the smaller players, if that's going to happen.
Yeah.
Right. Magnús, I was keen to bring you into the conversation. I know that you take a strong regional look at things, and you're in Iceland, but which is a super active spot to be right now in the salmon M&A landscape. But you're also very active in looking across Europe at what's going on. What's your perspective on this?
Yeah, I would like to second what has been said about consolidation and secondary seafood processing, especially in Europe. You look at that landscape, there are thousands of companies, and it's very fragmented, small companies. And it is not only driven by the need of the salmon farmers to get closer to the customers, which certainly is a valid reason, but it's also driven by the fact that there are a lot of technology changes taking place in secondary seafood processing. And the small companies, they have difficult time keeping up with the pace of investment needs in new technology. It's of course all going to automation, and also more and more demand from bigger and bigger customers that want more scale. So I think it is not only push from the salmon farming companies to do this, to learn more about the markets and get close to the customers, but also the need of the secondary seafood processing companies. I also would like to second what Ignacio and the other thing said about the health of the industry. It is a very, very healthy industry in spite of the depressed prices. But what that will eventually do, it will increase the places where salmon will be consumed. It's remarkable kind of to see the ability that the industry has to move from food service more into retail. Every kilo that is produced, the 2.5 million tons that is produced, every kilo is consumed today, even though it is at lower prices than most people would like to see. But that is increasing the size of the market. I think if I look here to Iceland, that has been a remarkable story. It is in relatively few years, say like five years, we've gone from nothing to something. It is still kind of like only a little less than 40,000 tons in production last year, but we are starting to see licenses of more than 100,000 tons, and people in the industry are talking about that the industry can grow to something like 200,000 tons. And I think that can be seen. If you take the market capitalization of the industry in Iceland, it is north of 1 billion euros. And that has happened so quickly and been driven by Norwegian companies that has brought both knowledge and capital. And that is, of course, the secret sauce is always to have both capital and knowledge in the same company, then things start to happen. And I see kind of like continuation of increased production. I think we still have fairly fragmented industry in Iceland, even though the 4 big companies that are all Norwegian controlled, 3 of them listed, and soon 2 of those will be combined, so there will be 3 listed companies. That is the lion's share of the licenses, but there are still about 10 to 15 companies in this industry, and it was announced this morning that one, you can call it boutique trout farmer, was sold to an Icelandic institutional investor or private equity fund, which is also interesting because I think there will be more Icelandic capital coming into the segment as we move on.
Do you think sorry,
Matt, can I ask a question? Related to all of these, you guys are focusing on the smaller players right now. How are they going to manage to compete with the land-based players, for example, in the US? I mean, I can understand how the large Norwegians can, but how are they smaller players going to compete? Because they have probably much higher costs than the land-based players, at least in the US.
Yeah,
I'm curious, right?
There will be consolidation, Ignacio. So there will be fewer and larger companies. I think also there will be more of kind of like that people will share infrastructure. So that and we can see that from Norway, that there are many examples of that people have successfully shared the infrastructure. So that is another way to compete. But at the end of the day, you are competing with the global industry, because the salmon has a global price, and it's a commodity. And
well, that's for now. That has been the traditional model, right?
Yeah.
You know, the risk here is, you know, you have the Teslas of salmon coming up, right, that are going to disrupt the market because they are suddenly starting to churn out some fish, right? They are right next to the large population centers. And then, you know, how are the traditional, you know, gas engine type producers going to react to that? I still don't know. I mean, I do not have an answer, but I know that something is going to happen. And as an M&A, you know, dedicated person, I want to read the future. I don't want to be in the past.
Right, Ignacio, I was keen to revert the question to you as you look so closely at the Americas region, and you're seeing these, you know, major land-based projects emerge. And actually, I was very keen, before we get to the outside Q&A, I was keen to ask you about these, you know, the opening up of the new Canadian coastal provinces, and how you, and also the Chileans, and how you feel that you know, all of these players will compete on a cost basis.
Well, I think that's the question of the moment, right? I mean, if you look at all, you know, we see a number of business plans for the up and coming guys, or some of the ones that are already, you know, established, and they are starting to churn out, you know, some fish, and everyone is aiming to take 10% of the U.S. market only. The problem is that when you have, you know, 5 or 6 of those, suddenly, you know, you have 50% of the U.S. market only. But then, you know, the Norwegians are going to react, and they have a lot of money, and the Chileans are going to react, and they have a lot of money, and they are large. So, you know, how is the market going to change over the next 5 years? That's the, you know, as an M&A question, that's what I want to understand, because I want to get ahead of the game and provide clients, you know, with opportunities there. You know, I think that the right move for some of the traditional players is to make the General Motors move. You know, you will have to go and buy into and invest into some of these, you know, land-based guys to get ahead of the game to your competitors. Otherwise, again, you're going to lag behind. I mean, you're going to be driving a traditional model in a world where, you know, there's disruption going on, and you just cannot ignore it. I mean, history, you know, will run you over.
Ignacio,
I'm very keen to get this question actually over to Kjetil, because you know, I know that you've had an awful lot of first-hand experience with, you know, the land-based players, and the last time, you know, we spoke a couple of years ago in New York, that your firm had just bought Billund, which has been a major player in building these plants. I mean, what's your best guess on how the RAS, the big new RAS players will come in on a cost basis and compete with coastal farming?
First of all, like, a lot of things have changed since we bought into Billund, and I left the Billund board last summer, and there's been tremendous changes in the order book from and the type of facilities which were there. But first of all, just would like to comment on the fact that my view is that Movi is probably the largest land-based player. So they have most fish on land. They just like put it into the sea when it's at a certain size. So I see a lot of like competence development and R&D happening inside certain small facilities around the world. So from my perspective, all large farmers are just like experimenting and building competence, ready to make the move when the time is right. And when it comes to the large kind of the new players, the Teslas, which were mentioned here, I don't see volume coming out in the market which will disrupt the price in the near future. So I see that current land facilities produce around 50% of the design capacity. I think that will be also the fact a few years from now. And I also have experience with building such facilities, which I usually use to like 2 + 2 + 2 rule, like 2 years of just planning, 2 years of building, and at least 2 years to to get the facility up and running. So in the future, of course, the supply-demand curves will meet, and it will be an issue for Norwegian's airborne salmon in. But at the current pace we are at, and the current projects which have started construction, I don't see any issues in the 5-year future for Norwegian salmon to not be competitive when it comes to price. And also land-based facilities, when it comes to price, it's all about scale, of course. And we haven't seen anyone producing at such a scale which will actually meet the costs which we have seen in Norway yet. So when it comes to cost, of course, we need to see how the big 10,000 tons facility is developing. Do they actually produce 10,000 tons? Because then we will see actually what is the actual costs, because we have never seen costs which actually are comparable, because it's all in Excel spreadsheets at the moment. So yeah, so for me, it's still a way to go. It's very, very interesting to see how the largest players will react. But I don't see any I don't see in the next 5 years that we have anything which will affect the price and the competitiveness of the Norwegian industry. But of course, maybe in 10 years we will have some movements when the volume from land-based and the land-based facilities which are close to markets are actually producing at the capacity which they are designed for, and therefore can meet a cost per kilo which is relevant.
Right.
I think that I heard a similar comment about Tesla 3 years ago, but it's okay.
Jørgen,
I got one part in my garage here, so I don't know. I think that this is going to go much faster. I think that if I were a small player, I would be very worried. I think that if you look at the history of producing fish right now, I mean, you can go and almost buy the technology. I mean, we're getting to that point where it's not that complex, and I would be I'm much more optimistic that land-based is going to grow much faster, because they are learning very fast, again, from the mistakes made in the past by other people. And I would worry, how do I get that product to the market and make money selling my fish? I mean, at a point in time, selling fish is going to be, producing a commodity. How to get it to the market, add value, satisfy my clients, and make money consistently. I think that it's where the situation is going to be. And I remember there was a phone company called Nokia at the time. That was actually 90% market share.
This is a good trend, Ignacio, because the world needs more fish and more salmon. The demand for fish is endless. So if the land-based guys can get control of the cost and produce at a competitive cost, then that's just a fantastic news, and it will grow the market, because there's no end in sight.
Yeah, the question is, is the market, are they going to outgrow the market? And then you're going to have a price crash that is going to restructure the market. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Again, as an M&A professional, that's I want to see the disruption, and I want to get my clients ahead of the disruption, be prepared, bring them ideas, and get and get ahead of the curve. Really, I mean that's the whole aim of M&A: get ahead of the curve.
I think
first we have to speak like that. They are cost competitive and able to produce at a market cost, and then we worry about the rest.
I think here we still are in the sweet spot on what kind of protein we are producing, and salmon is a fantastic protein. So my concern is really on marine infrastructure and planning, engineering, and really concluding on all these projects. There are 4 deliverables that needs to come into play when it comes to getting these projects off the ground, and those 4 are really getting the permits, getting the water rights, really doing the work on the sites, and looking at the angle, and I think. as you are saying, Kjetil, regarding the time it will take before we have significant volumes in this market, it probably will take even more than 3 to 5 years.
But 0.3% of the salmon production were produced on land in 2019. So there's at least a couple of years to build and a couple of years to start production. So I can't see any volume which will disrupt the market in the next 5 years at all. I don't see how it's practical to do so.
Jørgen, just for you to know, I'm sitting right now at my home, and I'm 45 minutes away from one of the probably largest salmon producers in the U.S., which is Atlantic Sapphire. They don't have any access to seawater. They have a marvelous company going there. I mean, it's pretty amazing what they did. Absolutely. Yes, it was expensive because it was the first, gigafactory, right? Just like Tesla, the first one was expensive. The other one is taking them, 6 months to build, and again, no access to seawater, right next to Miami, major center of consumption. And they are sitting right next to a papaya plantation.
Yeah.
So I don't need to be in the Nordics anymore to eat very good salmon.
I fully
agree with that.
I really don't
appreciate it.
Such a great conversation. But I just have to, first of all, this is a fantastic dynamic conversation, and I'd love to let it flow. But I do want to remind the audience that they can ask questions, and that just to get that part of the presentation going. It's a great, very dynamic, hot conversation. I'll try and interrupt as little as possible, but I just want to call those Q&A questions to come in, and let's keep it going. This is great. The point on Atlantic Sapphire is super interesting, right? They missed some of their numbers last year, but it's huge. I think somebody just mentioned that it's the kind of the leap. I think Kjetil, you said the transition from what's on a PowerPoint to what we're actually going to see now that, like, for example, Atlantic is operating at a higher level. Do you think, for example, that is going to open the doors for more finance if we see some good numbers from Atlantic Sapphire?
Yeah, of course, and I think it's but I think it's very important to prove this at an industrial scale, which has never been done before. And I think that's kind of a key question that everyone is waiting for: is are we able actually to produce at design capacity, to be able to do good, tasty fish, 4 kilo to 5 kilo slaughter weight every week, so we can have like a stable supply chain in and out. And I haven't seen that yet, so I'm very looking forward to Atlantic Sapphire being able to deliver on the plans. And I think that will, of course, make more money flow into land facilities, and we'll maybe see the traditional farmers get off the ground. And this will probably happen faster than we think, but still, I just see some bumps in the road before we're up and running at the volume which actually have impact on the supply-demand balance. As I mentioned, 0.3% of the salmon last year were produced, or in 2019 were produced on land. So there's a way to go since the market is growing even more. So.
Right, and Jørgen, one of the things I'm very keen to get, one of the first questions we've had from the outside is we saw this explosion of Norwegian projects, land-based projects, over the last few months, like a crazy amount of new projects. And then the other day, it seemed like the Norwegian government put brakes on that and stopped the special licensing scheme. I just wondered if you could kind of explain what's been going on and how that fits into what we're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a little bit uncertain exactly what is meant by the question. But if you are looking at, the special projects outside of Norway, the so-called R&D projects, we have a lot of those projects granted. by the Norwegian Fisheries Department, and many of those has backers behind to actually make a reality. What we are seeing in Norway is there is two lobbies. Number one is the RAS development, and what we see there is that Norwegian investors is also taking that route in Norway, but most visible is the project that's going to be made close to the market. So they are also in the process of being listed, and there's a lot of media attention to those. And then there is the industry initiatives towards offshore farming. And what we see here is that the big players is really coming together, the SalMar and the Nordax and the others that have really fantastic projects on the bedding. And they have applied for the areas that they want to utilize, and SalMar was the latest one now to have that granted. So what we see is that if the offshore farming is really taking off, there will be a huge potential volume coming from offshore of Norway into this market as well. And we know SalMar as one of the leaders in this industry, and you can't take for granted then that the supply-demand balance will be in check, in tune. Things will pretty much happen on a larger scale. We're talking about bigger volumes.
Right. And so, Jørgen, you mentioned 4 deliverables. This is one of the questions from the outside audience for land-based RAS. And you mentioned permitting. What are the other 3 deliverables?
So we are talking about, area planning, really, marine infrastructure. So you really need to have an area that is suited for that type of installation. And then you need to have your strategy straight on really where you want to place your end product. Obviously, you want to have an edge. You want to have a story, a sustainability story behind what you're doing. And what we see is that that's going to be more and more important going forward to really, draw some benefits from aquaponics, for example, is a trending thing, that you are producing vegetables together with fish. You really need to have your story straight and the strategy behind it.
Right, that's great, thanks. Ignacio, I'm going to give you a question which came on the land-based farms in America. And in addition to cost and economy of scale, what headwinds could these projects potentially face?
Clearly, access to early stage capital to get them off the ground, number 1. Number 2, management expertise. And number 3, marketing and sales expertise. I think that eventually, the technology is going to a certain degree, standardize. Producing the fish, in a few years is not going to be the magical part of it. And what's stopping a number of potential new players is, again, access to early stage capital. Everybody wants to invest once that the fish are being produced, but nobody wants to put the money before. And then, a number of these groups that want to produce the fish are organized by people who have no commercial expertise. And like I always like to say, at a point in time, anybody can produce fish. The secret is, can you make money long term selling the fish? So those are the issues right now, in my view.
That's great. And I wanted to take this question or present this in a slightly different way. Magnús, you were talking about this deal that just happened in Iceland. How does when these companies are approaching expansion for the first time, and you're looking at expansion of coastal farming in Iceland, how does the land-based equation come into modeling? When you're running an MPV model on a coastal farming site, Are you comparing with the land-based projects and kind of envisaging those scenarios?
Yeah, you have to have a long-term vision, like Ignacio has been explaining, and believe in the future if you're investing in a land-based farm. But obviously there are great prospects, and we have seen developments taking place here in Iceland for a long period of time. There have been on a small scale, but that is now scaling up, and there are talks about really, really big projects. So I think I absolutely agree with Ignacio that the future prospect lies there. That is a growth. But I think we still have a long way to go to be cost competitive, and that will be the process that these companies need to go through. Yeah, I think it is a development that will take some time, but very interesting development, and will just support the industry in growing and increasing the market share with this.
Right, and I think we saw the other day that and forgive me if I don't pronounce the name correctly, but Samaji is one of the big players that, in actual fact, has been producing salmon in Iceland for quite a long time. They have land-based expertise, and do you expect there to be land-based capacity in Iceland as well as coastal farming?
If you take Sandherji as an example through the list that Ignacio gave, the 3 things that needs to be there. They definitely have the early stage capital. They definitely have the experience and the expertise of doing it. And now they are looking at a aluminium smelter that was never built. So the big plot of land and the building, and then they are looking into the feasibility of converting that into a huge land-based salmon farm, just like we have in Florida next to Ignacio. So these projects will take place, no doubt about it. It will take some time. It is like it took Tesla longer time to reach profitability than the plant initially, but when it came, it was huge. So that may very well be the story with land-based as well.
That's great. Kjetil, I was keen to ask you about, there's 1 or 2 questions from companies that are developing RAS projects around the world. And I think there's some interest in the level of investor appetite for new projects. Maybe you could address that question. I mean, we've seen a lot of money chasing projects, but how easy is it for an entrepreneur in this space to find investors?
I think there are, we're seeing a lot of capital go into the space, but I know there are at least like 100 projects which have not been able to gain capital. So I think it's still pretty challenging, but still it's moving. So I tend to advise everyone just to try and to get out there and try, because it's from my perspective, I've been very surprised what project has actually been able to get capital and what projects has not been able to get capital. I guess that relates back to what were mentioned, like who's able to sell and actually have a really good pitch in the end. Because what's mentioned here in the end, a lot of the projects has the same technology and the same suppliers, and it all goes down to the kind of the whole storyline around and kind of the believe in the future. So I don't know if that answered the questions, but
yeah, no, absolutely. And one more question that I was hoping to fit into this webinar, Ignacio, please give us like an outlook for what the scenario for both the Chilean and the Canadian coastal salmon farming industries. What do you expect in terms of M&A and consolidation in those sectors? I mean, clearly Eastern Canada is one of the big growth areas, and then we look at the West Coast, British Columbia, and we see this strange phasing out of salmon farming in certain areas. What's your take on that?
I think that I would go back to my forward-looking, philosophy here is, why would you put your, factors of production in the difficult places when you can put them, right next to New York to be extreme, right? what it is easier to move fresh fish or to move people and knowledge and then just produce where you can. So yeah, I mean, to a certain degree, there is a traditional model. It's going to be there, but I think that you have to be forward looking and decide, do I want to invest, in the gas power model, or do I want to invest in the solar power model? And I think that if I were, somebody with capital, I would look for, the most experienced people, and I would move the people and produce the fish, in the closest place to where it's going to be consumed. And eventually, I think that, with size and knowledge, the cost gets there. And again, if I were one of the large players, I'm very, very surprised that they are not the ones really investing into the future, as opposed to continue to buy very expensive licenses, at sea, investing in the past. Like was said here in the seminar. I mean, they do have the knowledge for land-based, but they continue to invest in the old model. So again, I think there may be some consolidation of the smaller players, but if I were a large player, I would be looking to invest into the next wave here, to have my foot there. I mean, first of all, to get ahead of the curve, to learn, and to be able to apply also their own knowledge of land-based production. But something, again, more important, and I revert to this topic, they have already established the channel to the market. They know how to sell fish. They know how to make money selling fish. They know how to process it. They have the clients. And at a point in time, you're going to have, a lot of producers. And the question is here, how do, like Magnús was saying, you need to continue to expand this market. So that's a little bit my view. I mean, production is interesting, but the factors of production and what's important here is going to change.
What do you do if you're a Chilean CEO right now and you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh my God, you've got like huge new production facilities appearing in America. That's your market, right?
I take 25 or $50 million and then invest in 2 or 3 of these, and try to get ahead with a winner.
Right,
hey,
right.
Goldman is saying that Tesla is going to $1,000. Imagine if you had bought at $25.
Yeah.
I rest my case.
Yeah. Jørgen, we've seen, we did a database last year on the land-based salmon farms, and we saw so many projects in Norway. I've been here before, but a little bit different. How much? I mean, obviously, clearly the expertise is really in Norway, isn't it? With some of the RAS technology. How do you think that will evolve? How does this storyline play out? Do we see Norwegian entrepreneurs going all around the world and building these things in New York and Shanghai? Obviously, we're already seeing that. Or do some of these projects in Norway actually get built, like the Salmon Evolutions? There's some really kind of well-funded and well-managed projects out there. How does it play out?
It's an interesting question, and I think what we're looking at there is 2 or 3 roads ahead. Number one, the established players. They obviously are keeping their heads focused in on conventional production, but also understanding what's happening on the land-based side. And I think they will have, working groups looking at, if we're going to do it ourselves, how much capital do we need, where do we want to do it, and so forth. And you have to remember that these guys, they have the competence to do this from their previous history. And I also see that they can piggyback on post-smolt production in their own facilities out of Norway. You can easily develop a facility alongside a RAS or alongside a post-smolt production facility, and then grow it out to food site. So that's one opportunity. Another opportunity is like what Grieg is doing, and really focusing in on areas and markets that they believe will be a winner for a RAS, like in Japan for Grieg. And I think many of the others would then go strategically on these markets and establish with local players that they can work together with, that maybe have the opening to the markets directly. And then on the third side, I think from Norway, what we will see is that the farms that is active here and is in development, they will most probably be built, but it will maybe take some more time than what is the original plan. And that is what the limitation of this is all about. It's about the equipment, the planning, the work that needs to be done, the marine infrastructure, and then the competence, the people to really do it. So on that note, I think those three sort of strands of the ways will then determine how the Norwegian sector will react.
That's great, thanks. And Magnús, you talked earlier in the presentation about the potential downstream acquisitions. I mean, could this be a way that the salmon farming, if you've got available capital and you're one of the major salmon farmers, and you're looking at your portfolio of projects, and you kind of, well, I could spend my money on going further downstream and getting my products like really in tune with what the retail channels want, or I could go and spend $30 million on a land-based farm. What do you think the boardroom discussions are like right now when it comes to that type of thing?
I think many of the big ones will do both, but I think the downstream is probably what will be most visible in the coming, in the near future. It is like what we discussed earlier in this webinar. There are thousands of secondary seafood processing companies in Europe. It is a way too fragmented market. It is not efficient. These companies are struggling to keep up with technology and investing in state-of-the-art facilities. That is required by the customers. And then there is the obvious need for not only the salmon farmers, but also for the seafood companies in general to get closer to the customers. So we will see more vertical integration taking place, where you will have secondary seafood processing companies that have stayed independent, often family-owned, smallest companies, maybe with 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100 million euros in turnover. Few good customers, but they want to strengthen their access to capital, access to resource, and become part of a more stable value chain. And this, I think, will be the trend going forward.
That is really where the real inefficiency of the whole seafood industry is, right, Magnús? I mean, it's in the distribution part. I mean, we have become very efficient in fishing. We have become very efficient in aquaculture. Always improving, of course, but there's a high level of inefficiency and cost still embedded in the value chain all the way to the consumer. That's what Magnús, I agree with Magnús 200%.
Great. I've got two more questions. I hope you guys can just stick around for a few more minutes and we'll wrap it up. The last two questions. Kjetil, what is your view regarding, I'm going to give this one to you. What is your view regarding technology risk for the land-based projects? Are the technologies currently being adopted by various land-based players in the world that much different from each other? And I think just to add my own twist on that question, we do still see failures at the post-smolt facilities being ramped up by the conventional salmon farmers. Just recently, Nova Austral had one with a new plant in Chile. What's your take on that, being so close to the
since I've been investing in land-based technology for many years, it's a very relevant question. But my view is that it's not a problem with the technologies. The problem is, and the challenges are related to scaling that technology, because it's not a problem to produce salmon on land. What is an issue is to produce a lot of salmon, tasty salmon, sizable salmon every day, every week. That's the challenge. And when you want to do that at certain scale, you need to scale the technologies, and there are challenges. But I don't see that as a technology problem, because the technology works. It's a scaling problem. And then I also see I see facilities which has exactly the same technology. They are a living organism, so they're not running like it's a living organism. So even though you have two exact same technologies, there are changes in waters, and there are changes how the people work, like how much the pumps are actually pumping water. So there are like a facility it needs to be learned. And when it comes to this facilities, as you mentioned, which is a Billund facility actually in Nova Austral, but it's of course that when you build a facility the first time, it's often like my grandfather died of smoking, but he started smoking when he was young, but the problem didn't occur until he was older. And that's kind of what we see in all these farms too. Like it can work for maybe 1 batch, 2 batches, 3 batches, but then suddenly the problems occur. And the problems can be related to wrong equipment or how people manage it and changes in water, for example. And that's one of the issues that I've seen most of is actually how the intake water change over time, and actually how that change the biofilter, and therefore how the facility actually operates and acts. And you change feed, you put in different types of water and feed types in all the time, and all this affects the production. So when the fish die, you can't blame it on the technology. There's so much factor to blame it on. So to refer back to your question, I don't think it's a technology issue, it's a scaling issue, and it's a competence issue, and a learning curve issue.
And it does seem to be paradox of the is that you get risk the project, doesn't it? Because we've seen on the Atlantic Sapphire presentations, when they get to a higher tonnage, the impact of a failure in a unit becomes less impactful as the larger they get.
Yeah, and I think it's one very relevant question for a lot of farmers is that what type of risk profile do you want to run your farm at? Because if you kind of the farm can be designed at the density of say 100 kilos per cubic, but what will happen if you lose a batch or if you lose a batch of big fish, it will affect your farm tremendously, and the economics, you'll probably be bankrupt. So you will probably end up producing at lower risk, having fewer fish, which will kind of in the end also hurt your EBIT per kilo, which will probably make the fact that no, you're not as profitable as you thought, but you're running at a lower risk. So these are all like relevant questions which I haven't seen kind of the proof of yet, but I believe that's one of the reasons why the current land-based salmon farmers are running at a lower capacity than the design capacity is because the risk profile they want to run their facility at is a little bit different.
Right. So one final question, and I'll put this out to everybody. Just from Fishpool, which is obviously Salmon Futures Exchange, there's a question which is, how important will it be for external financial investors to secure income in a commodity that is volatile as salmon? And I guess some of these producers are volatile, but it would be interesting to get your thoughts on this. I'll put this question out to everybody and take it from there.
Well, I was lucky to sell Fishpool to Oslo Stock Exchange, and I thoroughly I'm really a supporter of the mechanism that you can go out there and hedge your risk. So to me, way to go, check out the forward curve and then do your betting really on what is needed to make sure you are making money.
Right. Any other thoughts on the future price and the that aspect of the stability of supply and demand?
The price will go up. It's easy to make a bet in seafood and specifically in salmon. It's a wonderful commodity and wonderful product, and the long-term trend is so obvious. The prices will go up. Right,
and I guess supply before 2020 happened, and to bring the pandemic back into this, there was rising Asian consumption, and new countries, new consumers, and a limited finite supply. You know, do we get, you know, to bring it into a kind of microeconomics perspective? Do you all still think that we'll see that kind of paradigm shift of a demand, or a structural shift in demand, and accompanied by a structural shift in supply for this, you know, bigger market?
Recessions have a very important purpose in life, and that is to enlarge and create markets. So if you survive a recession, like we see that the salmon industry is surviving this one very well, then you will only gain from it, because you will see more prosperous and bigger market ahead. And that is what is happening.
Right.
Yeah, remember that the industry is running now without restaurants almost. So I think that the key question, and that was something that was discussed at the NFI panel as well, was there was a substantial gain, you know, in consumption through the retail channel. How much of that gain is going to remain permanent? Most likely not all of it, but hopefully some. But then, you know, the restaurants are coming back, you know, sooner or later, and it looks like more sooner than later, at least in the US. The restaurants are coming back, and that's when you're gonna get the bang.
Right. Well, guys, that's it for time. I'd really like to thank everybody for their time and participation. It's been a really interesting conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Excellent insights. Once again, thanks very much to Mara Advisors for sponsoring this Undercurrent webinar. And please stay tuned for more content from us. And once again, a big thank you. It's been super. Really good to chat.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot.
Bye.
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 Everybody.